I gave an interview today to a Middle Eastern newspaper that was particularly interested in where the Israelis are going on Gaza. And as you probably know, Netanyahu, on his way to Washington, trailed that he had plans in hand for Israel to start high-intensity urban ops in Gaza again. And it was a good set of questions. So I started out by saying that, like the January 2025 ceasefire, the October 2025 ceasefire had three phases. In both cases, phase one of both ceasefires was challenging and involved release of hostages in exchange for Israeli attacks ceasing and humanitarian aid flowing better. Phase two, in both cases, was aspirational, and phase three was fantastical. Any agreement of any kind that depends on Hamas disarming itself, or sending itself into exile, or swearing off the relentless confrontation of Israel is fantasy. It is fantastical. The Israelis and Hamas know that phase two of the October 2025 ceasefire has meaning for the Americans, and that Donald Trump wants his Nobel Peace Prize, and he's got his board of peace, and there's going to be a Riviera, and there are going to be hotels, and there's going to be a Corniche in Gaza, just like in Beirut. And the Israelis and Hamas know full well that phase two is for Hamas to rebuild and for the Israelis to try to keep weapons and reinforced concrete out of Gaza. And phase two will last until Hamas or the Israelis are ready to fight again. But of course, phase two isn't going to happen as long as it depends on Hamas disarming. So Benjamin Netanyahu went to Washington with a plan for Israel to resume full-scale kinetic operations in Gaza to destroy Hamas. And this plan, developing the plan, is a perfectly reasonable staff process, but telling the world that you have created this plan, going to Washington with this plan, telling the world that you're going to Washington with this plan, is a more or less veiled threat to the United States, to Donald Trump. But it's a threat about Iran, and about Iran rather than about Gaza. So what I said to the journalist earlier is that Jerusalem will continue to pretend to accept Hamas rebuilding itself in Gaza as long as Washington keeps ballistic missiles on the negotiating table with Iran. If Netanyahu switches that operation back on in Gaza, the Board of Peace will look ridiculous, especially at the moment when the Board of Peace is being asked by President Trump to rebuild Gaza. And if operations resume, the people of Gaza will continue to suffer at the hands of Hamas and Israel. If that operation switches on, if it crosses the start line, President Trump might say that Netanyahu is getting out of line, but he will almost certainly say that everything in Gaza is going according to plan. That it is just the Israelis kicking around some bad people in Gaza, but it's still peaceful. And the ceasefire disintegrating does not mean that the peace plan is not going according to plan. The Israeli population have been ready to pretend that the Gaza war was all about getting the hostages back rather than about destroying Hamas and enabling Gaza to live at peace with its neighbors, that has been a useful fiction, because it has enabled everyone to pretend that the continued existence of Hamas does not preclude peace, some kind of long-term peace, if that's the right word, and that's a hudna, a long-term truce. So it has been possible for Israel to accept that Gaza will forever be implacably hostile to Israel, and that Gaza will be condemned forever to Hamas theocratic misrule, and that every few years Israel will, as the saying used to be, mow the lawn in Gaza. That is, go and drop a few buildings, kill a bunch of Hamas operatives, kill a lot of the locals along the way in order to buy a few years more of quiet. It would, however, be difficult for Benjamin Netanyahu to campaign to be Prime Minister of Israel by saying that Israelis will continue to serve in unending combat forever with no end in sight. Israelis with a strong stream of nationalism will say that they're ready to fight all day, every day, forever, and that if what's necessary for the continued existence of the State of Israel is permanent war, but they still have to pay their bills at the end of the month. If they are in a constant state of being a mobilized reservist, that is not going to be able to be sustained. The Israeli economy functioned astonishingly well for 2 years of war. Who was buying Israeli government securities to prop up the shekel? I don't know, but somebody was. Some states are configured for unending war, but we know what that looks like. North Korea has been configured for unending war for 75 years. Iran has been configured for unending war since 1979. Russia is newly configured for unending war, and Russia has consciously modeled itself on North Korea and Iran in order to make unending war the reason for Russia to exist, for Putin's dictatorship to exist, and for continuous carnage of Russians to continue. Israel can't be an innovative tech incubator and in a permanent state of war. Israel can't be a democracy and in a permanent state of war. And as much as it may surprise people who view Israel as something other than an exciting, tech-oriented, innovative democracy, vibrant democracy, if I can use a cliche, that is its essence, and I don't think Israel is going to abandon that. And one of the questions that our journalist asked me was, what about Israel's relationships with allies? And of course, Israel has very few allies. The Abraham Accords notwithstanding, Israel has terms of alliance with the United States as a major non-NATO ally, but it's not a deep alliance. So I'd prefer to say global partners. And here's the thing, Netanyahu chained himself to Donald Trump, to MAGA maybe, but to Donald Trump as an individual mostly. the last time he ran for election, they had lots of posters of Netanyahu and Trump, and the slogan was something very much like Netanyahu playing in the Premier League. That is, Netanyahu gets in with Trump, and anyone else would be sitting out in the waiting room. Thing is, after taking a high hand with the Democrats in Congress and during the Biden years, Netanyahu has sort of chained himself to the idea of a permanent MAGA government in Washington. And Netanyahu also lost a lot of goodwill among European leadership, mainstream leadership, and started trying to cozy up to extremist nationalist parties in Europe, which I don't think has done him much good so far. And Netanyahu is betting that he doesn't need anyone to support him overseas other than Donald Trump, which is fine as long as Donald Trump is still president, and as long as the Democrats don't control Congress. So watch this space, because of course Netanyahu was to stand for election in the next 8 months, and US Congress could change hands in the next 9 months. If Netanyahu can't say that he prevented a nuclear Iran, and he can't say that he made Israel safe from Hamas attacking from Gaza, and people start to notice the indicators and warnings that Netanyahu brushed off about the attacks in October of 23, and if Israelis, especially center-right Israelis, wake up to the fact that since 2009, Netanyahu has positioned himself as Mr. Security, and yet the worst attack on Israeli citizens in the history of the Israeli state happened on his watch, Netanyahu might just lose the election. So that's what I said. It's going to be printed in a French language newspaper in Lebanon, so I feel free talking about it in English to you, and I'd love to have your comments on this, and that's me for today.